and I thought I would maybe just go over one of my experiments that I did a long time ago, 3 times. It was a near-death experience that I induced in myself, and I did that in the following way. As individuals may know, your brain entrains when it has outside frequencies, whether they be audio or electromagnetic or whatever. If the pulse comes in, your brain will eventually, in lieu of any other extraneous stimuli, your brain will pick up on that pulse and start resonating with it over a period of time. So I have some machines here, and one of the machines is able to take the brain pulse down to approximately 1 hertz, which is a very, very low frequency. It's 1 cycle per second, essentially. But 1 cycle per second, what does that mean? Well, if you go through these things a lot, dropping from higher frequencies, maybe in the 15 or 20 cycle per second range, which is still relatively relaxed, you can actually, by slowly turning machines down, cause the brain to entrain lower and lower and lower and lower. And it was I just kept fooling around with it. I kept working with bringing my brain lower and lower. And here's what I found. At approximately 3 to 4 cycles per second, you enter the dream state, which is a very, very, almost not actually being very aware of anything. It's a very relaxed delta state, it's called. The delta state is in the 3 to 4 range, but it actually, the latter part of it, is in the 1 cycle per second range. And what I found as I dropped myself through that, I actually went through all the things that they talk about, these yogis and so forth, where you go from the sleep dreaming state, but still being aware, to a state that's essentially suspended animation, which is called the void. In many types of meditation, if you reach the void, you've reached nirvana. That's as good as it gets. And so I reached the void a bunch of times, and I found that that was fine, but I was wondering what it was like if I went to a lower state. As I went to the limits of my machine, which was 1 cycle per second, I was able to use various methods to move myself into what was called epsilon, which is near death. And what happens at that particular area is the void would be comparable to, say, for instance, the river Styx, where you're essentially in suspended, and I believe that's what the river Styx was. The boatman comes over, picks you up from one side, and you slowly drift across to the other side. And then you enter the corridor of light, which is almost always produced automatically by simply a reduced brain state. And I was able to induce it very, very easily. Once I got over being scared, thinking I was going to die, I was able to produce it very, very easily. So you go up the corridor of light. Every single time there's a gatekeeper. Every single time you go through a rebirthing process as your brainwave states drop lower and lower. And then what's on the other side? What's on the other side initially is a sort of a lavender, sparkly kind of thing, and then you go through it, and there's another world there. But this other world is very different. It is somewhat different than the one we have here. There's an existence there. There are events. There are things like that. What there isn't is negativity. In other words, not negativity like we know it. So in this 5th or 6th dimensional world, which is still part of the physical plane and maybe even a higher world, I really don't know. I didn't hang around that long. What I found is that the one thing it did not have was negativity. And then as time went along, I realized that what this particular plane is doing, maybe it's a cycling process where one plane begins and the other one ends, is this plane is becoming that other plane. The people, instead of dying individually, may very well have a collective consciousness of that fixed 5th and 6th dimensional space where there isn't negativity. In other words, let's just take our particular situation in this world. What we have in this world is a whole lot of negativity, a whole lot of fear, and very many other things that cause people to be highly disconcerted. And so one could say that this would be called an egoically based world, where people are trying to make things happen. It's an energy field. It's a very, very slow-moving energy field. And by definition, a slow-moving energy field is going to have very low-grade connections with divinity, because divinity is very, very high vibration. So what we have in this particular world here is a world that's going up asymptotically in energy. The energy level is going higher and higher and higher as machines are produced that produce higher levels of energetic, higher level energetic environment. Now, the machine that we have produced has that capability. What makes it relatively unique is nobody else has it. And so they have to sit there and cope with this little energetic machine called the human body, which isn't very efficient and certainly is not very powerful. Now, eventually, the human body, the energetic environment, and everything else that goes on is going to reach very high levels of ascension just by the environment that is produced by machines, etc., that will allow people to, I think, remove a tremendous amount of negativity from their system, because the environment will not be very negative. The problem is that's not here and that's not now. And even though that's going to be, in my opinion, the most likely situation for humanity, it's in the future. It doesn't exist then. Now it exists then. And I've always been just interested in now. So what we have is now with the machine. We have the ability to go to that area, that fifth and sixth dimensional space that I was fortunate enough to be able to feel and sense now. And what is that space like? It's a space where negativity is not really understood, because it doesn't exist anymore. It may be back in some deep, dark tome that they maybe study there or whatever, but it's not of much consequence because they don't deal in negativity. Now remember that reality is essentially a set of energy states. In other words, the physical plane as we know it is a very, very slow-moving energy state. That's all it is. Every atom, every drop of sweat, everything that you have about you, every thought you have, is essentially a manifestation of energetics. So when a person produces an atom, that atom is actually 5 or 6 levels away from the actual entry level from 0 point before it actually manifests as an atom. For instance, in reality, when things come off of 0 point, the energy starts coalescing into very, very small subatomic particles, which then come together into larger subatomic particles, until finally, after 6 or 7 iterations and agglomerations, it becomes an atom. But an atom is not a molecule. That's another manifestation of even slower energy, which doesn't become a molecule, isn't an actual person, which is an even or life form, which is an even slower manifestation, which is not a planet, which is not a universe, which are all slower and slower and slower manifestations of this highly energetic world that exists outside of our reality. So what we're basically doing is going back to the high energetic levels, moving towards the higher energetic levels as our reality moves towards 0 point, to the more subatomic things, to the faster moving things, to the 10 to the 9th times the speed of light that's theoretically possible in 0 point, and probably infinite speeds of light if you really get down into it. Now, there's a statement in alchemy called whatever is above is below. And I can tell you that, at least in my opinion, what it means is there's an infinite number of universes and an infinite number of heavens, and an infinite at higher and higher states, and an infinite number of hells at lower and lower energy states somewhere, which I'm very glad I don't have to go to.